Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Now, it's been a while since I did a video like this. I've got pandemic hair. I really need to get a haircut, but Ontario's in pretty tight lockdown, at least we're supposed to be, so I haven't. Anyways, I and Ellen actually borrowed a family member's car recently and did about the only thing we could do under this lockdown, which is go for a drive along Eglinton Avenue in Toronto to take a look at the LRT construction. To be perfectly clear, we don't want to fill in tunnels. What's done is done. The project is quite far along and we can't change it. And so when I make criticisms, you have to understand that I'm making those criticisms from the perspective that we should learn from our mistakes and do a better job the next line we build. Part of the problem and the reason that I get frustrated with the issues I have with the Eglinton Crosstown is that I see Eglinton as a really good opportunity for a really high-quality crosstown transit route and potentially cross-region transit route if it was a faster line. One that could connect, all the way from Mississauga City Centre east into Scarborough. It's got a really good alignment to do that. On the western end, you can link up with Pearson, you can go down the Mississauga Transitway, go right to City Centre. In the east, there's quite a few alignment options you could take. So the Eglinton Crosstown, from an alignment perspective, that central section of Eglinton is really valuable. As you guys may know, in the previous video I proposed a kind of northern crosstown route in Toronto, and I think if Eglinton was going to be a faster line, then that kind of route would probably be a lot less important and a lot less necessary. You have to remember, Eglinton is a line with a ton of connections. It has 3 subway connections and 3 GO Transit connections, and those GO Transit connections down the road will be just as important as the subway connections, if not more important in some cases. So let's look at the crosstown and the construction, and let me get some of my grievances out. So the first thing I noticed was traveling along the western side of the crosstown, the tunneled section. The tunnels are crazy deep, and that's to be expected with a deep bore subway tunnel, as we know and as we've talked about in previous videos, the same as you see on the Toronto-York Spadina subway extension. The problem is that the stations, despite being so deep, are still quite tightly spaced, at least especially on the western side of the tunnel portion. And because of that, even though you didn't do a cut and cover or a faster method of construction, you still get a ton of disruption because Eglinton is fairly narrow. There's a lot of development already existing along it, and so the construction laydown zones basically have to go east and west. And so once you factor that in, you still have construction covering most of the street. And so if you had kind of taken that alternate option of cut and cover, it might have been a little bit more disruptive, but if it was done in 2 or 3 years instead of the 10 years that the crosstown construction has been going on now, I think you probably could have had less disruption. It's also worth noting that this is kind of the way or style of subway construction that makes a subway look the worst, right? It's deep underground. The stations will have a lot of stairs in some cases that people will have to ascend and descend to get to their trains. And when you're thinking about that, well, yeah, when you build subways like that or metros like that, it's obvious why people would say LRT is a better option. I think a cut and cover in some sections where there isn't a ton of hills probably would have saved a lot of money and would have made stations more attractive. Elevation is probably not an option in the central section, but we'll get to that later. So beyond the deep stations, I don't have a ton to talk about regarding the underground section. Honestly, I like the design of the stations a lot. I don't have a universal dislike of the Eglinton Crosstown. I don't like the train design or the train model a ton, but I really like the station designs. I think that they kind of follow the TTC's legacy of having, some bus facilities. I like the multiple entrances. I think those are wise investments to make. I like the fact that the stations have this really cohesive design. So you look at a crosstown station and it's like, yeah, that's a crosstown station. You know it just by looking. And I think that's something that we haven't really achieved in Toronto before, especially not with the Toronto-York Spadina subway, which was kind of almost made itself unique by making every station look completely different. And so I like the cohesive design and the kind of more understated tone of the crosstown. But yeah, deep stations isn't great. So as we kind of traveled along, we got to the surface section, and this is where I have more criticism. The problem with the crosstown on the whole, at least the eastern section of it, is it's a local transit service. Now, on the face of it, a local transit service isn't bad, and again, it's going to be an improvement probably, over the current buses, because at least you can argue trains are more comfortable to ride than buses, there's zero emissions, service reliability should probably be higher with the dedicated lanes. But I don't think there's actually that many benefits over buses, because you do lose some things. For example, buses which run on one corridor and then switch to another is something you're not going to see on the light rail. You won't see 24-hour light rail service, and so there's a little less consistency there. You will probably get less frequency than with the buses. And if there's an accident, especially one involving the LRT trains, that's going to be much more disruptive than with a bus, because buses can reroute pretty easily. So you kind of get this thing where it's like, yeah, the light rail has probably a better overall experience, but it's a bit questionable. But where it becomes really questionable is that this is a local transit service, and I don't think Toronto really needs that. Toronto has fantastic local bus service, like one of the best local bus services in North America, if not the best. And so kind of creating rapid transit, which doesn't fulfill a new role, it just kind of replaces something we already did pretty well, it's strange. The western section will make trips significantly faster, but the eastern section probably unlikely, especially because of issues with policy. Essentially, I don't think that replacing the bus makes a ton of sense when we already have good bus service. We should create something new with our rapid transit investments. I think elevating the eastern portion of the crosstown to turn it into more of a SkyTrain style service would have made a ton of sense. And since there's not a ton of people living on the corridor right now, as people will tell you, it probably wouldn't have been a big issue with the community being really angry that there's an elevated train, and it could be a good positive influence on future transit projects in the GTHA. Now, the issues go beyond the LRT or tramway as a kind of idea. I think that done right, a tramway is not necessarily a bad thing, but the problem is that there's a bunch of factors that make the tramway worse than it needs to be. A lot of them could be fixed, and I hope they will be fixed down the road, but the fact that a lot of these issues are going to exist from day one makes me feel like we didn't think things through fully. So the first issue I see is the kind of infamous station Sunnybrook Park. The station's located right at the intersection of Leslie and Eglinton. Basically how it works is Leslie comes in from the top and Eglinton goes like this. It's a T-junction, essentially, and the LRT runs down the middle of the road. Now, some have suggested that running the tram on the south side of the road would have made it so that you could still have the full functioning intersection, and the LRT would just be on the south side, and when it got to Don Mills it would go into a tunnel and then shift to the center of the road. Why is this important? Well, when you operate on the street, you lose the ability to have ATC. Now, the problem with this is that the LRT is literally just crossing a single intersection and it loses the ATC capability. Why does that matter? Because Science Centre at Don Mills Road is actually a very important station. It has a big bus terminal, the Ontario line's going to terminate there. You want to run full frequency that you'd have in the underground section all the way to there. Now, fortunately, this isn't a lost cause. My proposed solution would probably be something along the lines of closing the intersection to traffic going across the tram tracks and then have traffic divert to where the portal for the trains are and then do a U-turn. It might seem a little janky, that's because it is a little janky. It's the kind of solution that you need to use when your initial plan didn't seem to factor in all of the necessary things. But the fortunate thing about this is that car drivers waste a couple seconds of their time until they decide to take a different route, and the LRT can operate at its full frequency all the way to Don Mills Road, which is pretty awesome. It means the grade-separated or metro section of the line extends quite a bit further than it would otherwise, and so seeing this stop just kind of made me a little annoyed, and it has for a while. So Sunnybrook Park isn't the only example of a place where I feel like the line was kind of suboptimally planned. Another issue is the lack of transit signal priority. So essentially what transit signal priority is it's where a train or a bus appears at an intersection, and transit signal priority is meant to reduce the amount of time it waits at a red light, essentially. Or it's meant to make it so that it doesn't even encounter a red light. The problem is that for whatever reason, I couldn't tell you, the Eglinton Crosstown is going to have very limited transit signal priority. The problem with this is that you're basically holding up a large train that carries several hundred people for a couple cars that are making left turns, most likely. That's just super problematic from a basic logic point of view, but also from the point of view that it shows that our transit planning process is really focused on car drivers. Way too much, way more than it should be. It's okay if a transit route inconveniences drivers a bit, because it's going to carry far more people than the road will in terms of drivers. So it's kind of a needs of the many, needs of the few type thing. And it's not like the driver really suffers that much. They have to wait a few more seconds, but when you compare the amount of total time wasted for a train compared to a couple cars, there's a massive difference. The value is clearly letting the train go first. So that limited signal priority is problematic, and especially more problematic when you consider the fact that part of what could make a service LRT successful is good signal priority, and so without it, you kind of are whittling away the benefits of having a surface LRT in terms of, oh, it's going to be fast compared to a bus. Well, it might not be that much faster if you don't have good signal priority. It's just one of the things that are kind of part and parcel with the LRT. You know, you get the guideway, you should have the signal priority as well. So that kind of makes me a little unhappy. Now, the last element of specific issues I see with the way the line is set up is the two stations at Hakimi Lebovic and Golden Mile being so close together. Like, I was amazed. We were driving along, and as we passed the service stops, I was like, wow, these are really close together. And then we got to Hakimi Lebovic and Golden Mile, and I was like, what? This is insane. The stations are 100 meters apart, which is basically just one 3-car train length. Now, I understand it's because they want to provide mid-block service, and like that's reasonable, but it just seems crazy. Like, we're putting in so many stops, that's going to make the trip longer, and well, I understand that the point is to kind of serve the local community. In the area, it's mainly just strip malls and car dealerships, and so I think that it's kind of a weird choice. Nonetheless, I was confused by this, but I think this leads into my next point and my ultimate point on the Crosstown. When you talk to people about the Crosstown, and when I suggest that maybe something more like the SkyTrain, I know I say it a lot, would have been better, people often say that, oh, there's not really enough demand on Eglinton East. I find that a bit of a weird argument for a couple reasons. First of all, there's already massive redevelopment going on with the Crosstown as it is. Surface or not, there's a lot of development going on, especially around Golden Mile. And so the fact that we are saying that because there's not a ton of towers along Eglinton right now, it doesn't need the capacity is kind of odd. Especially when you talk to the same people and they think that the Ontario line should just be the downtown relief line because we need as much capacity as possible in every location that we build a transit line. What I think is also weird is that when the justification is made that the line doesn't need more grade separation or shouldn't be elevated because there won't be enough riders, at the same time it's kind of a circular argument, because since the line is on the surface and the stops are really tightly packed in, the trains will probably operate slowly, and I don't think it will be a failure in any means. I'm sure the line will be quite successful. Toronto's transit tends to be well used, even when it isn't super fast, which is good. But I think you would see a lot more riders using the line if it was fast like a subway. And I think that, for example, in the case of Hakimi Lebovic and Golden Mile, if you just put one elevated station between the two, the cost difference between that and two pretty extensive surface stops probably isn't going to be that gigantic, especially when you consider the benefit of the faster service and the fact that operations are more reliable because you can't have cars driving onto the guideway. I also think that it kind of sparks a larger discussion about total subway capacity. In Toronto, we have one east-west subway line, and we do have a good east-west GO line, but we have two north-south subway lines and a couple north-south GO lines, and we're trying to build another subway line traveling north-south. So I think the suggestion that like we've got a lot of capacity east-west on Bloor Danforth and it has to compete with Eglinton is really weird. The people riding the Bloor Danforth line are often not the same people who will be using the Eglinton line. A ton of people live in North York and want to get to areas west of the city like Mississauga. A ton of people live near Eglinton and in Midtown. A ton of people don't want to go all the way down to Bloor to ride rapid transit. So I don't think that the market between the two is that competitive. Sure, some people coming in to like Kennedy will have to choose between the two, but on the whole, the lines are fairly well spaced apart, and I think that Toronto has tons of demand and could easily justify multiple east-west crosstown subway routes. And so, yeah, I find that argument a little strange. Nonetheless, I'm excited about the Eglinton Crosstown. I have my qualms with the line, but I think it's important that we discuss what don't we like about our transit projects so that we can improve our future transit projects. Eglinton isn't perfect, but it's going to still be a really big improvement. I'm super excited for when it opens, and I hope you guys don't take this the wrong way. I just think that finding the issues is the first step in fixing them. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.